button.
Okay.
Here we go. We can get started.
All right. I'm going to share my screen for the PowerPoint part of this.
Okay.
Oh, you've got to turn on screen sharing for me, Elaine. It says screen sharing is disabled.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, I have no idea how to do that.
Let's see. Okay, hold on. There we go. Now I got it. It's always a fun part getting things started. Hey, there we go. All right. So last week, guys, we talked about real railroads and the business of it and safety and, stuff like that. This week, we're going to go a little more fun, and we're going to talk about the cars that are on the railroads. And then we're going to talk a little about rail fanning and railroading. And then any questions you guys have, again, just let me know as we go. And we'll go down through there. But we're going to get started. And you see some different model railroads here on the screen. The ones on the right-hand side, as you're looking at it, where the donut is, and then the one below that are the railroad that I belong to up in Smyrna. So just an idea there. As we plug. We'll plug that a few more times, just because I can. All right, so that's what we'll be covering today. And so the first freight cars, guys, were flat cars. They loaded everything on flat cars, and you can see the picture there. That was really the first passenger train. They took some old wagons and put special wheels on them and towed them behind a train. They quickly found out that maybe that wasn't A, safe, and B, didn't do what they wanted. So they started building various cars for various needs. And so it depends on the era with what those things look like. And so here are kind of the eras of railroading. And you're gonna get a lot of disagreement on this no matter what source you look in. This is what I think is a pretty good list. The old time era before 1820s, like the Wild Wild West in places like that. And then the classic steam eras just after World War I, all the way through World War II. And then steam goes away in the transition era and we move to diesel. And then the two modern eras. And you can see kind of a train from each of the areas up on the screen there. All right, so freight cars. The Boy Scout guide for this says you have to be identified 10 different types of cars. We're gonna look at a few more with that, just so you get a couple extras in case you forget one, you can remember another one. And the Association of American Railroads has 11 classifications they list freight cars under, and this is the classes. And we're gonna go through each of those, except for training, because it's a training unit. It just means they train on it. It's not a big deal. So, flat cars. So here are some flat cars. Basically, flat cars are flat cars. They don't have any box on them or roof or anything, and they can carry pretty much anything you can think of that you can put on top of that. It's kind of like the back of a pickup truck or the back of a flatbed truck. And you can see here, they carry pipes, they carry tanks, they carry all sorts of stuff. Back in the day, they were about 40 foot long. Nowadays, they're 60 to 89 feet long. They're very big. And you see a lot of them on the railroads today carrying various things. The other thing about this, and the reason they went away from flat cars, is because none of this is protected from the weather, obviously. So you need to have something on a flat car that can get wet or dusty or whatever. So sometimes they build bigger flat cars because they have bigger things to carry. And these are heavyweight flat cars or Schnabel cars. And Schnabel is from the German word, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, and if anybody speaks German, my apologies for mangling this. Transschnabelwagen. And that basically means carrying beak wagon. And
That was actually very good.
yes, thank you. And I remember a little of my college German, not much. The top picture there is one of those Schnabel cars. And they'll carry anything from giant generators to air conditioning systems to whatever they can squeeze in that thing. Those cars are typically massive. You see them running by themselves. They very rarely run with other things. This sort of car is sort of like the oversized load on a tractor trailer, if you're familiar with those out in the highway. And you can see there's a couple of generators and stuff here. But they're just huge. You don't see them very often, and when you do, they're usually by themselves or a very short train because they weigh so much. So that's kind of what those are. Let's see. And then, so flat cars have developed into the cars that carry automobiles around. So you'll see auto racks full of new cars going up and down the railroads. But back in the old days, they didn't do it that way. They had some really weird ways of moving cars around, including, as you can see here, they're pushing them into box cars on the bottom there. So they'd open up the side of a boxcar and push and wiggle the car in, and they get 2 or 3 cars in. And then in the 70s, some of the adults in the room may remember the Chevy Vega, but they used to load them, as you see in the 2 pictures kind of on the right and the right top, where they would load them vertically into a car and fold it up. So they had to have special oil coolers and stuff like that. So those were called vertipacks because they packed them vertically. And so the railroads had lots of troubles figuring out how are we going to transport cars. And finally, they got an idea. And they got an idea from, of all places, the circus. Because the circuses used to run around all the time. They had big circus trains, and they'd load all their private cars and their trucks and whatever on flat cars. And the railroads went, that's not a bad idea. I wonder if we could do that. Whoa, went one too far. Let's go back a shot. Previous, yep, there we go. So they developed the auto rack. And the first auto racks looked like the one in the bottom left, the green car. They were open to the air. You can see how they loaded the cars there in the center, and they just rolled them all up. Now in the 70s and 80s, they quickly realized 2 problems with this. One was anybody who wanted to come over and paint something on their new cars could, and you could throw things at the new car and break them. So they've now gone to fully enclosed auto racks. These things are 89 foot plus feet long. They're very tall. They're like 18, 20 feet tall. They carry 2 or 3 levels of cars, and they can carry 20, 22 cars at a time. And you'll see 50, 60, 80, 90 car blocks of these on the railroad. So that's a lot of cars, especially around here with Nissan and the plant down in Spring Hill. You're gonna see a lot of this stuff, a lot of these various auto racks around this area. So this is a big time car in this area. And you can kind of see how they load them and they reel them in, they fit them in. So it's not as hard as working them into a box car like they used to do. Still
So, in that top middle one, is that, like, that's an auto rack. So, so do they carry other things in cars that look like that? Because I see a ton of those. And so, like, are all of those cars?
All of those are cars, SUVs, or trucks.
Dang.
So think about it. All the cars that they build up at the Nissan plant up in Smyrna, they move them out with those. All the cars made in the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, transported by that. That's how they get them around. There are some massive auto yards where these things, as you can see in the bottom picture, them loading or unloading, I think it's loading. But they just back them up, open up the doors, and wheel them all in.
Huh.
Auto racks are pretty crazy. And they're also huge. They're really hard to run on model railroads because they're so big and long. You need huge curves to kind of take them.
Are they like super heavier than usual?
Well, once they get the cars in, they're pretty heavy. But if they don't have the cars in, they're really light because all they really are, and I think this top left picture here, you can see it on, they're just sheet metal on a frame. So the cars just drive in there and then it gets heavier. But when it's empty, again, the ones you generally see going north towards Nashville are empties. Generally, the cars you see moving south are loads, just because of where Nissan is and that sort of stuff. So that's what an auto rack is. Now, there's another type of flat car. It's called a center beam or bulkhead flat. A little bit of a word mouth there. They carry building supplies, lumber, utility poles, all that sort of stuff. See a couple of examples here. You're going to see a lot of these in the local railroads too. And again, they're just flat cars with different sort of ways to hold things on them. And this is, again, stuff that the weather doesn't really bother. I mean, you can see wood, you can see, those are sheets of, what goes in the wall? Whatever the wall boards are, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but that's what those are on that other car. So that's what basically those are. So, and that's really all the flat cars there are. Now, there are intermodals, which are sort of flat cars and sort of not. Intermodal cars have kind of a well in them, And that's where the containers, and you can see the containers in the center there, sit. And back in the early days, they just stuck tractor trailers on top of flat cars. You can see those in the top pictures. And then during the 70s and 80s, they kind of developed this system of intermodal traffic. So what happens is these containers are all standard sizes, as you can see there. About 90% are 20 or 40 footers, and we use 53 footers here in the US mostly. They all fit on these giant container ships. And that's what they do. They unload them full of product. They go to where they need to offload the product. They load the empty ones back on the trains and take them back to the ship. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the tractor trailers you see the trailers are actually these intermodal containers with wheels on them. They lower them onto a set of wheels, truck drives off to Costco, Walmart, wherever, drops their load, comes back, the railroad puts it back on a train and takes it back to the port to be shipped off to get more stuff in it. So it's a really complicated system of getting this stuff to market, and it really works well. And a lot of trains you're going to see on the trains on the lines these days are these trains, and they are the how can I put it? The hot trains. So on a freight train, these guys go ahead of everybody. If you're in a slower train ahead of it, you have to slow down, get off onto a siding or somewhere where this guy can pass you safely because they don't want these guys to stop. And so these are intermodals, and you'll see a little bit more of this later, but this is basically, there is a lot of this on the railroads today. This is the big sort of traffic right now. And if we were doing some ship traffic, I'd show you some stuff on container ships. They're like 100,000. They're the size of an aircraft carrier with hundreds and hundreds of these things on them. So it's pretty cool. All right. Boxcars. All right, now back to so once the railroads figured out that things get wet, we don't want them to get wet, they built a roof over it, the boxcar. So the boxcars started off, they were like 20, 30 feet long, and now they're 60 to 89 feet long. And you can see them, if you look at the picture in the bottom bottom right of your screen, you'll see an old boxcar, the Southern Belle down there, next to two modern boxcars, and you can see how much they've grown in just the last 30 or 40 years. So again, this is sort of in the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s, most trains would be 80, 90% boxcars because that's what they put stuff in. Everything from cars to washing machines to whatever. Nowadays, a lot of that traffic's been taken over by those containers we saw earlier, so you see less and less of the boxcars. And they're used nowadays for things like newsprint, cardboard, paper, some commodities, but that's what they ship around in boxcars now more than they used to. All right. All right. So, and have you ever played a game with dice? So if you roll two 6-sided dice and they both come up 6, it's called boxcars. And the odds of that, as you can see here, it's basically 1/2 of 1% every time you roll the dice that you will get 2 6s. And thus concludes the math part of our program. All right, so back 100 years ago, the railroads liked to advertise on their boxcars. And by advertise, I mean put big billboards. And you can see that on the left with that Frauerbach beer, which is a great looking car. The problem was the railroads were not, how can I put this, very nice about it. And so you'd have a car that said Coca-Cola, but it was carrying Pepsi. So in 1938, Congress got involved and said, no, can't do that anymore. So now, if a car has an advertisement on it for a specific product, it has to be carrying that product, which is why you don't see these cars much anymore. The railroads, however, do a lot of promotion on themselves, and you can see that in the other picture where you've got the pacemaker and the kitten from our last episode sitting down there, and even Sargento cheese back in the background, and that's what that car carried, Sargento cheese to places far and wide. The majority of cars that are done in this sort of scheme back in the day, especially with the billboard cars, were reefers, what they call reefers, and that's refrigerated cars. And they're the ones that carry all of the food goods from place to place or things that need refrigeration. And around here, you can see that big white one on top. That's what we see around here a lot. And what they're carrying in that is McDonald's French fries of all things. And there was a wreck a couple years ago up in Cowan, and a number of those went over the side of the mountain. and the birds flew in for miles because they were loaded with French fries. And the birds came and ate all the French fries that were on the ground. So you can kind of see some of the, sometimes railroad is kind of funny because you get these wrecks and it's like, oh, wow, look at that. Back in the old days, though, before we had mechanical refrigeration like the air conditioners in our home, they used ice. And they used 200 to 400 pound blocks of ice that they cut out of lakes in the north. And you can see on the picture, the little black and white picture all the way over in the corner, some guys cutting ice out of a lake. And what they did was they had these huge ice houses and they'd bring them in. And then when they needed them on the railroad, you'll see the picture kind of in the middle there, they would open up the hatches on the thing and they'd shove the ice in there, and that would keep the car cold while it was traveling from place to place. This went on until the mid to late 50s, guys. And at that point, finally mechanical refrigeration came in and they were able to stop all of this icing that they had to do. But it was very hard work. I mean, imagine shoving 100, 200, 300 blocks of ice for a single train load of cars at a time in the dead of summer. So that probably wasn't the funnest job in the world. You will also, if you look in the bottom, you'll see the two cars down there, the silver car and the one that says cocoa and chocolate. The cocoa and chocolate car, you can see the hatches on the top. Well, those hatches are where the ice went. So they had a kind of a bulkhead here. The ice would be separate from everything else. All right. But they have unit trains now in this that carry, we talked about orange juice last week. Sometimes they have fresh fruit trains from like Washington State to New York filled with cherries and things that you can get there that you can't get here. Refrigerator cars were really important. Once they figured out how to get them to work, they were able to take produce from different parts of the country to different areas. So suddenly, we'll use orange juice as an example. Oranges don't grow in New York City. So people in New York City were suddenly able to get fresh oranges and fresh orange juice from Florida because of these cars. So it was a real change with how the American public ate and how they were able to get access to food. And it really caused a big social change. So it's one of the weird things about railroading that, they make a lot of things different. So one car you're not going to see in the railroad anymore is a stock car, or a very few of them anyway. Stock cars were cars that held livestock. So they could take poultry, turkeys, chickens, ducks, pigs, cows, and you can see a little of them in these pictures. They also had some weird ones that carried fish, and in one case, oysters, fresh oysters. So that car in the middle top up there would haul thousands and thousands of fresh oysters from New Orleans to Kansas City. And they had several of them to do that. So you can imagine how many oysters they fit in that car.
This reminds me of my father's Lionel that was his when he was a kid, which is World War II era. And he's got a cow car and a little ramp that vibrates. So the cows come walking out of the cow car and around the little ramp, and then they walk back into the cow car. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, those accessories are great for those post-war Lionel trains. They're really cool. The cow that's escaping from the bottom down there, that unfortunately I don't have any mechanical thing. He was just trying to leave, so he kind of opened the door up there. There were a lot of poultry cars in this area because there were a lot of chicken farms around here. So Tennessee Central in particular had a number of poultry cars and other things. This all went away when trucks came out. There were some specialized services into the 90s. But for the most part, once trucks took over in the 60s and 70s, the stock car went away. The biggest stock car ever was a triple-decker, 89-foot, and you can see it over here in the left corner, the Pig Palace, which must have just smelled wonderful on the railroad as it went by you, filled with thousands of pigs 3 levels deep in that car. And there are like 20 or 30 of those. So you can kind of imagine the odor that was following the train at that point. So those are stock cars. Gondolas are next, and this is not the pizza place down the street here. These are cars that have a low wall. It's kind of like just something to carry bulk materials. And you can see a couple of examples here of what they're carrying. Carrying some rail and welds and some things like barbed wire and a big flat piece of metal in the center there. And then up top, they also carry other things that are a little weird. In Florida, they've got a bunch of these that carry sugar cane. So they've got these huge sugarcane fields down in the Everglades, and they cut them and they load them onto these hoppers and they take them for processing. Back in the day, California, a lot of the sugar was made from sugar beets. And when they did the sugar beet harvest, as you can see in that top picture, they just mounted them and loaded them onto trains and shipped them off to the local place to make sugar out of them. And that's how they make sugar. So it's kind of interesting. That's gone away now that we've got more refined sugars and things that we can get other sugar from. But these rail cars are used for any number of things. You can see them, a lot of times you'll see them today loaded with trash or rubbish and metal rubbish. So all sorts of little metal pieces that they throw in. There is on 55 towards Manchester, if you look, there is a big scrapyard. They have a railroad spur that they back in gondolas full of junk and take it off for processing. So that's in our local area. So those are gondolas. So open hoppers are what everybody thinks of when they think of coal trains. And they do carry some other stuff. They can carry ballast, they can carry wood chips, but coal really is the big hauler with this. They usually are sent in unit trains. So they're sent in one big group. You very rarely see a real coal car loaded on its own. And they go to like a plant or a port. And if you look down in the corner on the left side with those two ships, that's the port in Norfolk, Virginia, where a lot of coal gets put into. If you want an idea of the size of that, those two ships are about 1,000 feet long. So that is one big place of coal right there. Next to the next picture over is the plant over in Harriman and Kingsport, Tennessee, where they bring in coal all the time too. And you'll see coal come through Tullahoma. And if you get a chance and you look on the side of the coal car, you'll see some letters, the unit markings that we talked about last week. If you look those up on the internet, it will normally tell you what power plant those coal cars are going to, because often the power plants or whoever leases that power plant runs those coal cars. So they'll travel in a unit from Indiana or Kentucky or wherever they're getting the coal from to the plant down in Alabama, offload, and then take the empties back up the way they came. So again, you'll see these a couple times a day through Tullahoma, usually one south full, one north empty. So, and you can see some various pictures of them floating around here. And the one on the bottom right, that's in Powder River, that's out in Wyoming, and that's the biggest coal area in the United States right now. And there are 3 railroads that service that one area to pick coal out of. That's how much coal's over there. Covered hoppers. So eventually they figured out that we cannot anymore not have a roof on this. So this is for stuff like grain, livestock, I can't talk tonight, limestone, fish meal, stuff like that. So a lot of the things you see around here are filled either with plastic pellets or with grain. And you can see the plastic pellets having a bad day down the corner there. But they didn't develop these cars in the 60s or 70s. And when they did, they quickly figured out that, wow, we could really use these for a lot of stuff. And one of my favorite applications for this is that they fill these full of plastic tubes, little plastic tubes about yay big. And they'll take them to Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper plants, and they blow those little tubes up into the 2-liter bottles you see in the stores. So that's kind of a cool thing that they travel around in. Grain trains certainly are a big feature here. We export in the United States a lot of grain to other countries to make sure that they can get fed. And you can see some of the examples of the various grain cars in the screen. In the middle center, if you guys ever go to Knoxville, as you're going over the mountain towards Knoxville from Crab Orchard, you're going to look over to the left and you'll see a giant mine. And this mine has its own railroad that literally all they do is they take limestone aggregate out and take it down to Harriman, and then Norfolk Southern hauls it away. But they've got their own railroad with their own paint schemes and everything else. It's really cool to look at. But that's that center picture there. All right. And a lot of times the railroads too, for the grain trains, have their own schemes. So CSX is the CSX Grain Express, and they're sort of a tan car with a piece of corn painted on it. And then Kansas City Southern, you'll see down here, has the black with sort of the red or the solid white. And then that top first one in that one picture, the one that looks like a rainbow, that is actually full of dangerous chemicals. And the Canadian National Railroad painted a rainbow on it to make it look pretty. So sometimes the railroads can be a little silly too. All right, tank cars, woohoo. All right, tank cars carry liquid, makes sense. just like a tanker does on the road. And you can see the various type of tank cars that we have here. So the first ones were made like in 1865 when oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. They needed a way to get it out that was more efficient than rolling barrels onto a flat car or a gondola or a boxcar. So they built a big barrel and stuck it sideways on a frame, and thus the tank car was born. You can kind of see some of these cars up here. You'll see these two are kind of more modern, and then in the background, so the smaller ones from the battle days. You can see that one. That's from like the 1920s, that mobile gas one. That one's carrying argon, so it carries a gas and it's pressurized. One thing about tank cars, especially filled with petroleum or ethanol or argon or other dangerous chemicals, they're the ones that get in trouble when there's a wreck. We'll talk about wrecks in a minute, but there was a wreck in a place up in Canada that flattened basically the whole city when it blew up. And these were all tank cars that did that because they didn't tie them down correctly. They also used to carry milk, which does not blow up, in a tank car. And then vinegar, of all things, was transported in tank cars as well back in the old days. So you can see the vinegar car over here. Here, let's talk about train wrecks then for a minute. So the first train wreck in the United States was in 1831. It was over in Charleston, South Carolina. They'd bought a train over from England. They were trying it out. And the guy who was helping the guy run it thought that the boiler was being too noisy. So he closed the safety valve and then tied it off with a rope. Needless to say, the train exploded, killing him, hurting a bunch of other people. That was the first train wreck in the United States. The one that's most noted around here, there are two. So in 1918 up in Nashville, and if you guys have ever been to Bellevue in Nashville, and there is a memorial to this, two passenger trains from the Nashville, Chattanooga, St. Louis, the line that was owned by these guys out here in Tullahoma, went head on into each other on a foggy night. And they killed 100 plus people and hurt 150 plus more. It's probably still the worst rail accident in United States history. And that top picture you see is of the passenger cars after the wreck. So there was a lot of damage, as you can see, done by that. The bottom picture is of Waverly, Tennessee. And we talked about tank cars a minute ago. Well, there was one filled with liquefied petroleum, and a couple days after a wreck, a derailment, the car went up and took a bunch of other cars with it. 16 people died in that, and about $6 million worth of damage were done to downtown Waverly. And you can see from that picture how much they were done. Train wrecks are not as uncommon as you think. Obviously, ones with personnel being injured or killed are pretty rare. But most months you get 2 or 3 of somebody going off the rails somewhere or the other thing. My favorite wreck story was they restored a steam engine to service back in the 70s, and the president of the Southern Railroad said, "I'm going to be the engineer," and he promptly drove it off the track. Nobody was hurt, but it kind of made him a little embarrassed, to say the least. All right. Military trains. So the military does use trains, and you can see a couple of those here from various nations. Back in the Civil War, they used them for transporting troops, and of course, transporting these big mortars, like up here in this corner here. I don't even know where my mouse is anymore. There it is, up here. And then in World War II, of course, we took tanks. We still do that. These are modern tanks. And then the Germans would mount gigantic guns, and you can see the size of this guy compared to this thing, and would shell Paris or London from like 100 miles away. So the big railway guns of the Germans were something else. There's actually one in Virginia you can go visit, and I mean, literally, you look like, you know, a little ant next to the thing. It's gigantic. And then the Russians in the United States back in the Cold War would occasionally come up with the idea of mounting nuclear missiles on trains, and this is a Russian version of it. The United States never even got around to building a prototype fully, but they came up with that idea. We still use trains today. You can see in the middle picture, that's a pretty recent photo of trains being used for transport. About a year ago, the local National Guard unit loaded themselves on trains for a trip. It was pretty cool to go watch that and how they loaded it up. So there are a lot of different special freight cars that don't fit the mold and carry special stuff. Here are a couple of them. You've got one that carries steel ingots right out of the furnace. They can be 1800, 2000 degrees, and this train's carrying them as it goes. You've got nuclear waste car, probably not one you want having a derailment, but there is one there. Department of Defense owns that, obviously. And of course, you have a car filled with pickles and tomatoes, because what better way to transport pickles and tomatoes, but in giant vats. And then on top, if any of you remember the old television series Gilligan's Island, maybe they found the SS Minnow because that's what it looks like. But they'll put boats on and do all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So you'll see these every once in a while on a train, some odd load. You see a lot of things like tractors and construction equipment, but these are some of the more strange ones.
Sir Roger.
Yes.
Have there been any derailments in Tullahoma or any accidents in Tullahoma?
Yes, there was one about 6 months ago, not even that long ago in Tullahoma, just past, you know where the Dairy Queen is and all that? So just past that section over there, so heading towards Winchester, they had about 8 or 9 grain cars and a couple empty tankers come off the track down about a mile outside of town. So that was a pretty good sized wreck, as a matter of fact. It snarled things up pretty good. And then what they do basically is they push everything off to the side, then a third party comes and cuts all the cars up and takes them away in parts. So they don't really mess with it. They fix the rails, get trains running, and then somebody else comes and cleans it all up. And that company is generally R.J. Corman, and they have big red trains that you'll see occasionally. But yeah, there was a wreck in Tullahoma about 6 months ago. A year and a half ago in Nashville at the yard, there was a guy that got run over by a train. One of the guys working there wasn't paying attention and he got zapped. So yeah, there are accidents in this area, certainly. Thankfully, not that many bad ones. All right, so let's talk about passenger cars. So passenger cars have the passenger cars themselves and then sort of the head end, which is the stuff in front of the passenger cars that do different things. So you've got express cars and they carry they were the UPS or the FedEx of the time. You'd send something by railroad because those two things weren't in existence. They went away when FedEx and UPS came out. The system kind of went away really quickly. So if you wanted Omaha steaks, they'd load it onto a refrigerator car and send it on the front end of a train. Or, usually too, these cars were really brightly painted and kind of custom painted like the ones you see here. Another type of car that you don't see much anymore, but ran all over until cars and trucks really came in, were horse cars. So back in the day when horse racing was a really big business, they put the horses on these special horse cars and they take them to various tracks for the races. If you've ever seen the movie Seabiscuit, there's a scene of them doing that in that movie. They think, it's an interesting thing with those. There aren't many horse cars left. They don't use them because people just truck trailer them wherever they need to go or fly them. But they were an interesting way of doing business for the railroad for a lot of years. And the military even used them to travel with cavalry and stuff like that. So, all right. And then a baggage car, this makes sense. You need to have someplace to put the baggage. And you can see an older one on top, the Amtrak one that's used today in the bottom, and then over there on the left is the inside, and that's where they put your baggage. Pretty straightforward to remember that one, the baggage car. So there are 2 other more car types. The railroad post office was around forever. Until the late 60s, early 70s, the railroads took most of your mail. It wasn't trucks, it was railroads. And you can kind of see a couple pictures of the interior on top. And then that orange and green car on the bottom right is a railroad post office car. And they had guys in there, and when they'd go by a station, they'd get a bag of mail, and they'd sort it, and they'd give that station the mail for that town. And that's how the mail was delivered for years and years and years. 113, as a matter of fact, years of doing this. The last one went out in 1977. There actually was another, quote-unquote, railroad post office that lasted about a year more, but it was a boat, and it went to a boat in an island in the middle of nowhere up in New York, and they finally discontinued that about a year after this. But that was the railway post office. Then, of course, there is the prison car, the always fun and famous. The Russians use this, and some other countries use this, where they basically have bars, and they throw you into this car and drive you to wherever they want you to go, prison-wise, gulag-wise, or wherever. And actually, the bottom left picture down there is of one of the Russian prison cars. Unfortunately as well, if you've learned about the Nazis and stuff in World War II, that's how they transported folks to the concentration camps, were in boxcars that they lock, prison cars, things like that. So it's kind of interesting, a little bit of dark railroad history there. So let's talk about the actual passenger cars. This is the stuff you're going to ride in if you take a passenger car. So you'll see these are the coaches. This is just cars with chairs in them, basically. They call them chair cars as well. You can see the older ones on the left there, and then Amtrak on the right. And then below that, that's kind of the interior of an Amtrak car, the kind of a layout. These cars are typically the cheapest way of rail travel. This is called second class service on a railroad. You'll get a couple different classes in railroad passenger cars. First class means you not only get to stay in the train, but they feed you for free. So all your food and drink is included in the trip as well. So this, though, is a chair car. Just sit there, look out the window. You can sleep in it, do whatever you need to do. And that's what this is. And a lot of smaller railroad cars and stuff like transit cars and stuff, they're just chair cars. So the dining car is next, and that's where you'd go to eat back in the day. You can see a new one on top over there on the left, and then the older one on the bottom. And then in the middle, you see a picture of what the inside of one of the old school dining cars looked like. And you'll see a lot of African Americans in that picture because back in the day, that was one of the best jobs they could get. Unfortunately, it wasn't like today where, you know, we try to teach everybody fairly. But back then, being a railroad steward was a terrific job that would give them benefits even when nothing else would. But that is a picture of the old, I think it's Baltimore, Ohio. But they did a lot. You could have the best food in the world on a railroad car, was what everybody who's eating on them told me. You can kind of see the advertisement over there on the side. We talked last week about the great big potato that was developed for the railroads. This is all part of the dining car experience. And even today on Amtrak, they have dining cars. They have plates with white linen service, and go and order a steak or whatever. The food's not quite the quality it was, but it's still pretty good. And in my collection, I've got an actual couple railroad dining car service cookbooks, which are interesting to read if you want to make tomato soup for 50. So, and then there's some dining car menus. And you can see some of the prices. If you remember the big baked potato we talked about last week, that's on the one on the right, and it's all of 30 cents. So back in the day, you could eat good on the railroad for a cheap price. But yeah, you could really eat. They offered huge menus on these cars, and they cooked everything on the train fresh, which is pretty cool. So passenger cars also, there are lounge and cafe cars, and some of the lounge cars have pianists in them and bars and everything else, and you see some of the pictures of them here. Amtrak still has a few of them floating around, which are that one picture there on top. And then the two on the bottom are some older designs. But you can see from the pictures, they were really nice places to be. You go, talk, play cards, have a drink. You got to realize, too, that train travel is a lot slower than airplane travel. So like from Chicago to Seattle on an airplane, 5.5, 6 hours. On a train, it's 3 days. So you need something to do while you're on the train. And that's where these cars come in. But you get to meet a lot of people, and it's kind of fun. So, and then the sleeper car. So you can sleep. If you're on a 3-day train trip, you might want to sleep. These are cars that have beds in them, basically. You can see the older one in the middle there. And then Amtrak's kind of around the sides. The top picture on the left over here, let's see if I can get the mouse to work. Yep, there it is, right here. This is one of the sleeper car rooms before you sit in during the day. This is what it looks like. At night, it converts into this, a room with a couple beds, like a bunk bed system. So you have a bunk beds, you sometimes have bathrooms, private bathrooms, sometimes you have a shared bathroom, but this is all a sleeper car. And this is first class railroad service. So your food's included, your drinks are included, the sleeping compartment's included, and you can see some of the designs for Amtrak over there on the right, on the top. So sleeper cars are pretty cool. If you're ever going to do a long train trip, I recommend getting a sleeper car because it's a heck of a lot more comfortable than sitting up in a chair for 27 hours. All right. 2 more types. There's the dome car, and that's kind of a lounge car gone crazy with a big glass dome on top where you can sit and see the countryside as it goes by. And then the observation car. Now, back in the day, the observation car was the last car on the passenger train. And you can see 2 big examples down there in the bottom. That's the 20th Century Limited on the right, and in the middle is the Hiawatha from the Milwaukee Road. And then on the left, you see the interior of that center one. So you could go back there, have a drink, and have this beautiful view of the road as you were traveling. So observation cars were really cool. They were where the Hollywood stars went to meet and mingle and things like that back in the day. And today's trains don't have them as much. If you see one on the end nowadays, it's probably privately owned. As a matter of fact, the 20th century car on the right there is a privately owned car. Very rich person owns it, obviously, but I saw it at a train show once. And it is gorgeous on the inside. It looks just beautiful. So these are kind of the passenger car types. So that's really all the passenger car types. So there's also maintenance of way cars, and you see a couple of different ones here. The maintenance of way stuff is the ones that take care of the railroad itself. So you have speeders so guys can get around. That's that top picture. You'll see the kind of the center two pictures on the right. In the bottom picture, that's a rail grinder, and you see those come through Tullahoma occasionally. And basically what they do is they just grind the rail down so all the impurities are gone. And as you can see, it lights things on fire, so they have a big hose to put it all out. And then on the other side is just a wreck train. If something does happen on the railroad, especially out west, they have these huge cranes they can use to get out there and pull things off the track and do stuff like that if they can't get a car out there. Back in the old days, the railroads, each railroad had their own crane cars to kind of take care of these issues, and that's what one of those looked like. So MOW is just pretty much anything that takes care of the railroad track and the area around it. You'll even see like Ford pickup trucks, Chevy pickup trucks that have these things on them that click down and they can ride on the rails with them. They're called high rail trucks, and that's pretty cool as well. All right, so the coolest, however, of all of the rail cars that I think is the rotary snowplow. So what they basically did was they put a big piece of rotating metal on front of a railroad and said, let's use that to clear snow. In this, let's hope it runs. This is what it looks like. And yes, that is snow. It's pluming out 40, 50, 100 feet to its side as it drives along and sucks it all in. And the photographer's about to get whacked by it. So that is a rotary snowplow car, and they're really cool. So as you can see here, it just spins this thing at great speed and cuts through snow. The railroads use them out west a lot, up in the mountains and even in Kansas and places like that, you'll see them. And when there's a big blizzard, they bring them out, off they go. Whoops, wrong picture. All right, we talked about cabooses last week, but I just had to say, yes, cabooses are a type of rail car. They are non-revenue. Most of the MOW stuff is non-revenue. That means it doesn't make any money for the railroad. They have to pay for it. And here's some various types of cabooses you can see around. And there is a caboose, obviously, downtown Tullahoma. And that's an old L&N caboose. Although actually, I think it's an NCSL caboose they painted, but that's okay. So that's that. All right, so now we're going to talk about types of trains. So there's the mixed freight, and this is historically very common, still common today. This is called, there's all sorts of different cars on it. So you're going to see everything on a mixed freight car. And one of them going through Tullahoma might look like, if I can get this to work, hold on, let's not kill ourselves with volume. So here's one rolling through Tullahoma. See the French fries at the front end. And then, here it comes. Then there's a hopper, some more French fries, or fruit, or whatever they're carrying in those today. But there are a lot of those on there, my goodness. And then another hopper. And so this is what a mixed freight is. It's just all sorts of different freight cars thrown together, you know, boxcar there on a train. And the railroads use those to kind of clean out, basically.
Mr. Roger.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I keep interrupting.
You're fine. That's what you're supposed to do, Espen.
But are the cars that are stacked on top of each other, are those a separate type of car? Or are those just two box cars stacked?
You want the intermodals?
I don't know.
All right. Give me a second. I think I'll show you what you're talking about in just a minute, okay?
Okay.
Let me go through one more of these.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So that's the mixed freight. Whoop, all right. There's the local. That's kind of another form of mixed freight, although really everybody says it's a different type of train, but I'm not going to argue with the Boy Scouts right now. So the local is just a train that travels around the local area and does things. If you see the two big engines that are parked out in front of the depot here in Tullahoma, they run the local. And you can see a picture of them down there on the right. And they interchange with the local businesses and the local other railroads. And that's all a local train is. They're usually pretty short, and they're basically just there to switch out industries and stuff. See, there are a couple pictures here of Tullahoma down there.
Did you just call the trains in Tullahoma pretty short?
Yes.
Because when I'm stuck waiting for a train to go by, it does not seem pretty short.
Well, I'm going to say, let me be clearer than on that. The locals are pretty short. The mixed freights, the unit trains, the intermodals, they're not short at all.
Okay.
Although out west, they're longer. Out west, they have trains up to 2.5, 3 miles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. So the unit train, which we just mentioned, is a train that's all one type of car. So it's all coal cars, all grain cars, which we're going to see here. If I can turn this down so I don't kill us with the volume. And this is a grain train over somewhere near Mississippi, I think. But you can see it's all grain train on it. So they carry one type of car. Nothing else is on there. And they wrote from point A to point B. It's a unit. That's what it does. So here's what that looks like. And you'll see these through Tullahoma too. Coal trains, grain trains, stuff like that. So that's what it is. Awesome. Pretty. I love that Kansas City scheme. If I get this to stop every once in a while. All right, Caitlin, here's, I think, what our question was a moment ago. So an intermodal train. This contains stuff on those containers. Let's turn this volume down again so we don't kill ourselves. And again, this is in Tullahoma. And yes, this is a longer train, Elaine. You're right. So, Caitlin, is this what you were talking about, dear?
The two stacked on top of each other? Yes.
Yes. Okay. So those are containers. They're not train cars. They're more like trailers for tractor trailers, if that makes sense. And so they are these intermodal trains are just giant blocks of these that go from distribution center to port. They're put back on a ship, and then they're sent back off to get more stuff in them. So they can be single stacked or double stacked. And out here, they're mostly double stacked. If you go out west or up north, in some areas up in the Northeast, they're single stacked because the tunnels aren't tall enough and they don't want them to crash into the tunnel, of course, so they single stack them. But here they're double stacks. So double stacks are called double stacks, single stacks are called singles, and then flat tops are what they call them if they don't have anything in the hole. So, and that's an intermodal train. All right, whoops, I'm gonna go. Okay, so we're done with all the real railroading stuff now. Let's talk about some more fun stuff. So the model of the railroading badge for the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts thing has two things that you can do kind of on the fun side that they recommend. One is rail fanning. So what is rail fanning? Rail fanning is going out and watching trains. And you can do it at any number of places. If you want to do it here in Tullahoma, my best bet to you is to go to Spinelli's, get a pizza, and look out the window and watch the trains go by. That's probably the safest place to do it here in town. There are locations like Union Station in Nashville that have a porch where you can watch the trains go by there. Of course, right now, rail fanning is difficult with COVID-19. I'm not going to say it's not. But if you want to do a little, I've included some different online resources here that you can kind of look up and see videos, live shots, whatever. Rail fanning, a lot of guys do it to take pictures. So photography is a big deal in rail fanning. So when you go out, unlike this picture, I think this is the first picture I've ever seen of a rail fan group that doesn't have a camera in it. But the guys will have cameras and video cameras and drones and everything else. And they take pictures of trains. And that's where a lot of that stuff I just showed you, those videos, they're from rail fans. And there are so many places to go rail fanning in the United States. There are whole websites devoted to it, blogs, the whole 9 yards. It's fun. If you want to do it, it's not my thing. I like to do it, but it's okay. It's a train. But there are a lot of different ways to do it and things how to do it. If you want to look at trains in a museum or something like that, there are several in the area. There's the Tennessee Central up in Nashville, and the TC actually does train rides as well, and they're really good. And they'll go over to Monterey, Cookeville, and then back here. And they have a lot of different stuff on site in our little museum. Down in Chattanooga, there's the Tennessee Valley Railroad. They have steam engines as well as diesel engines, and they have a much bigger museum set up, so to speak, and they're really cool. The National Museum of Transportation, if you ever get up to St. Louis, that is probably the largest collection of railroad stuff in the United States is there. In North Carolina, near Charlotte, there's the North Carolina Museum of Transportation, which is on an old Southern rail yard. And it's really cool. They've restored the roundhouse and done all sorts of things like that. And then for those of you in the Atlanta, Georgia area who go down there, there's the Southern Museum of Civil War Locomotive History, which contains an 1860s era train, the General, which was stolen by the Union forces and chased by the Southern forces in another train up the railroad track. And they've made several movies about it, The Great Chase, Great Train Chase. But that locomotive is over there in Atlanta right now, and you can go visit it. Of course, this all is dependent on what's safe and what's not. Talk to your parents, of course, before you do any of this. But the online resources, they're all like YouTube and things like that. They're pretty easy. And you can catch trains usually on them pretty easily. So, and again, rail fanning is a lot of photography and videography. If you want to take pictures of trains, this is a great hobby to get into. All right, now we get to talk about some fun stuff. Model railroading. Woo. So this is what I do basically. And if anybody in Andrew, Caitlin, Mark, Rachel's family knows, I build models in general. So I build tanks and planes and other things.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them. But I really like model railroading. And why I do is because I can make my own worlds. The great thing about model railroading is it's kind of the limit of your imagination. You can build all sorts of craziness and make it fun or make it super serious. There are guys who have layouts that have dinosaurs in parks roaming the streets. There are guys who make layouts who are literally, this layout is August 12th, 1953 at 11 p.m. Every piece of stock, every picture, everything on this railroad looks like it did on that date. And then there's guys in between. So you can go to any extreme in model railroading and really have a good time with it. You can see a couple of the pictures here. Obviously, you've seen the top one. It's been behind me this whole time, although reversed because of the way this does it. And that's our model railroad up in Smyrna. The three pictures are from the same railroad. You can put all sorts of detail. If you want to get started, Model Railroader magazine or the World's Greatest Hobby site has a lot of stuff for folks who want to get into it. Obviously, let me know. I'll be glad.
How many model railroads do you have?
I currently have, please don't judge me, about 500 cars, train cars, and probably 70 locomotives. But I've been doing
Not a lot at all.
Yeah, I've been doing this since I was 5, though. So let's, a little backup on that. There are some great model.
Roger, if you knew how many dolls I own, you would know I am not judging you.
Okay, good. Glad to hear. Everybody has a hobby, I think. So this
yes.
is another way of doing that. So model railroading, there's just so much to it. It's kind of hard to talk about. But I want to talk about scale a little bit because this kind of scale is important in model railroading because it kind of gives you the idea of what you're going to build and how much money you're going to spend. Scale is basically how big is something in a model compared to how big is it in the real world. So if it's a 1 to 35 scale, that means 1 foot on your model is equal to 35 feet in real life. Pretty simple. Sorry about the math. I know we don't want to do any more school, but that's what we've got to talk about here. These are the major scales that you see here on model railroads. Live steam, and there is a big live steam group in Columbia, Tennessee that does open houses several times a year, and you ride those trains. That's 1/6 scale. So 1 foot equals 6 feet. Then there's G gauge or garden railroads, and they're a little bigger. So they're about 4 times as small as that. And that convention actually is going to be in Nashville next year. It was going to be this year, but it got canceled really because of the tornado. Yes, ma'am.
When you mean ride, do people like get in the car?
They sit on top of them.
Okay, they sit on top of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was like, how do they fit in the car?
Yeah, I understand. That's 1/6. You could there if you're a kid, there are some 1/6 railroads if you're really tiny that you can fit into, but most of them you can't.
Okay.
All good. So O gauge is the one that Miss Elaine and Mark and Andrew and Caitlin were talking about earlier. And that's Lionel. So if you guys are familiar with that brand name, that's an O gauge railroad. So that's 1 to 48.
Aren't there different kinds of O scale depending on the radius of the turn?
So it's all O scale,
Okay.
but different radius tracks. So even in O scale, there are a couple different O scales. So there's like O toy gauge and O real gauge. So there's so much to explain. It would take me a week to do this.
But it's all O scale.
It's all O scale because that's
Okay.
the size of the track is what it's based on. And O scale typically also has a third rail down the center, which is where the power comes from. S gauge, which is 164, which you don't see much anymore, but a lot of your grandparents and great uncles and stuff would have had American Flyer trains as kids, and that's what S scale is. 187 is HO. That is the most popular scale. That's what the pictures I've shown you of my railroad are. It's 187. It's a nice scale. It's not too small. It's not too big. One of the problems with model railroading is when you get into N scale, which is 1 to 160, which is half the size of HO, and then 1 to 220, which is Z scale. And if you want to see how small Z scale is, do you see the picture of the briefcase down there? That is a Z scale layout in a briefcase. That's how small Z scale is at 1 to 220. So really little tiny trains.
And they actually run.
Yeah, they run.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were developed by the Germans and the Japanese, who don't have after the war, and the Japanese obviously don't have a lot of space. So a lot of the Japanese trains are Z or N scales.
Cool.
So, and just to give you kind of a visual idea, because it's hard to tell from the pictures. So this, if I can hold it up on the camera right, that is an N scale locomotive right here. So everybody see that? All right. And then this, I'm reaching again. This little bigger job, this is an HO scale locomotive. So if you want a size difference, if I can pick this up, look at how different these two sizes are. All right. Now, let's say you want to do O scale. Lionel, that's cool. Yeah, it's also 5 million pounds and huge. This is an O scale train, steam engine. And just to give you the idea, there's our N scale friend again next to it. You're looking at a lot more room for O scale than you are for N scale or even HO. So those are the 3 big scales in the United States. And there's the tender. Most of HO, most of O, most of G in those bigger scales don't just run, they also have sound. So they have steam sounds, whistle sounds. Some of the O gauge trains literally produce steam out of the steam cocks. It's ridiculous how detailed they are. But again, model railroading is what you get out of it. Kind of some things you need to know. It's expensive as you like. A good starter set. Yes, ma'am.
So do you like buy each individual piece separately, or do you like build the houses and stuff? Like, is it like Legos or doll sets? I don't know how to say it exactly. Like, because
it's not so much. Now, I'm going to say Legos, O gauge guys. I've seen O scale railroads that use Legos to build buildings. So they do use them. And there is a Lego scale train sets that you can build Lego trains. And I've been to some conventions where they have them and they're massive and they're awesome. But this is more like plastic models as far as the houses go, or cardboard models as far as the houses go. So it's more like stuff like if you build an airplane kit or something like that with the glue, that's more of how you build this stuff than Legos, if that makes sense. Now the cars and stuff, you could buy them in sets or you can buy them individually. Most people buy them individually. Now, an individual car in HO is going to run you about $25 to $35. An individual per car. An individual car in O scale is going to run you $60, $75.
I meant like, do you look at like what you're trying to build and you like get like a kit.
Mhm.
You're like, okay, this is gonna build a nice, cute red house. Or do you go up and you're like, I want to build a nice, cute red house, and then you print out like paper and stuff, and you make a red cute.
You can do both.
Okay.
There is no limit to the imagination on how you do things. I'm hopefully this will work, and I can show you this little model railroad I built for this, and I can show you what I've kind of put together. But you can do all sorts of things. So there are guys who use parts from 10 different kits to make one building. There are guys who print out on their printers color pictures and make buildings out of that. The train cars, though, are all the same sort of build because they've got to be for the weight and how they move. A starter set that gets you kind of track, trains, some cars, and the power supply is about $200-300 for HO. Now, once you get rolling in the hobby, O-gauge steam engines like the ones I was talking about that had sound and can spit steam and have engineer talk and all that, you're talking $2,000, $2,600 for a single locomotive. So model railroading can be as expensive as you want it to be. And you were talking about, hey, I want to make a little red house and I want to do this. Well, that's kind of one of the keys to all this. You got to kind of think about, what am I going to build? What do I want to build? How do I want to do this? And kind of pick a theme and go with it, because that's going to make it a lot cheaper. Because one of the things people do when they get in with it, they're like, I'm in the model railroad, let me buy everything. And it's like, oh God, I have everything and nothing fits or nothing makes sense together. So a lot of times people say, I want to model the Kansas City Southern or the Louisville, Nashville, and railroads around my hometown. And that's the railroad stuff I'm going to buy. And manufacturers make everything in its mother, if it was on the rails, they've made it. So it's not that hard to find.
Roger, to that point, I know that Andrew and Caitlin have talked about their great-grandfather's set that he built. One of the things, to go along with that is you can print, you can build with Legos or anything.
Oh, yeah.
His big thing was he built it in his woodwork shop. And so he would cut out lots of different sizes of different buildings and then paint literally his entire town, and kind of did the whole landscape of that. So, it, like you said, you can get creative, you can go buy things, but you can also make them out of anything. And wood cutouts are kind of a cool thing because then you can paint it and make it anything you want. So a good question, Olivia.
Yeah, it was, Olivia. And just as a note, Rachel, on that, a lot of the O-gauge and G-gauge guys do stuff like that. Now, you're not going to see that as much in the HO or N world because it's smaller and the wood just doesn't scale right.
Right.
For people to look, and the HO and the N scale guys are much more into realism than the O and the G scale guys, which sounds weird, but trust me, it's there. The main thing that I tell everybody if they want to get into this is whatever you decide to do, if you want to make a layout where dogs run steam engines with modern train cars behind it, enjoy, have a great time. It's your railroad. Do what makes you happy, nobody else. Probably a good lesson in life too, but that's the thing. Kind of stick with what your idea is and what your plan is, and if you like it, go for it. Again, I've seen guys who literally model one day of 1 year in 1 hour and don't deviate. And I know guys who literally have dinosaurs on their layouts, and they're both cool. So it's really all just fun.
I've discovered collecting dolls that new collectors tend to be worried about what is going to be valuable in the future. And if you want an investment, go to the stock market. Don't invest in collectibles.
Don't invest
because they're going to lose value. So whether it's trains or dolls or whatever you want to collect what you like and what makes you happy, and not based on what you think is going to be valuable, because it's not.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing with trains, especially O-gauge trains, the Lionel stuff. There are folks in Rachel and your sets that your relatives had. Gosh, I hope you guys have kept them, but if not, that's fine too. But if you have, a lot of
my father still has his set up in the basement. So,
okay.
But supposedly it will be my responsibility someday.
It's amazing. They've got guidebooks of like O-gauge, how much this should cost. Now,
oh, good.
Yeah, it never comes out to that. So it'll say this engine's worth $600. If you get 200, you're going to be good. And
you got to look at the most recent prices on eBay.
Yeah, something like that. But again, don't go into this thinking you're going to collect stuff and 20 years from now be able to afford your retirement, because you're not. You're not. It may cost you your retirement if you do it wrong. So there are just so many ways of doing this in so many different things. And so much of it turns out to be really, really cool and fun, that it's all about just having a good time. I mean, one of the things I like about the club is I can go up there and run with the guys, and everybody's got something different. And you're like, ooh, what did you get? Oh, that's really cool. And there's a lot of that going on. And it's just fun. It's what it is. The theme for model railroading, if you look at any of the sites like National Model Railroader or Greatest Hobby or any of those, it's model railroading is fun. And that's what it is. So let's see here. All right. So some railroads you can find online, just because I wanted to give you a couple to look at if you wanted to see some. You've got the Appalachian Ohio. That's O gauge, but it's 2 rail, not 3 rail. And the picture on top is actually that railroad. And you want to see a railroad that's monstrous. This guy's whole basement, he's got about 2,600 square feet O scale. And he literally has floor to ceiling scenery. Realistic scenery. It's crazy. He's got a rotary dumper for the coal cars that actually works. The picture underneath it to the left, where the guy's standing in front of what looks like a train, well, it actually is one. That's Dr. Nick Muff, and he found that F unit at a scrapyard and had it moved to his basement, where he has that in a passenger car in his basement that he's painted up as the Kansas City Southern, and you can see the layout next to it, and that's how he does things. The bottom right-hand side, I don't know, the kids may not know this, but I'm sure the adults in the room have heard of Rod Stewart, the rock singer. Rod Stewart has one of the largest model railroads in the world that he's built himself. He used to take kits on the road with him and build them, and that's a picture of him and his city down there on the bottom. And then the other one's just a model railroad. I think that's the Chesapeake and Western. But those are various sites of big model railroads that you can kind of look at and get some ideas and just see what the top side of the hobby looks like. On British TV, the Brits really like railroading and model railroading. And most of what we've talked about during these 2 sessions has been American railroads, because European and Asian are really different. But the British are so crazy about trains, they have an American Idol sort of version or a chopped version done with model railroads. So they have guys and they're given challenges and they have to build them within the time frame, and then they get judged. And so that's the Great Model Railroad Challenge TV show, which you can find on YouTube, and there's the actual link to the site. So that's pretty fun. And then finally, there is the big daddy of them all, which is Miniatur Wunderland, which is another German. It's in Hamburg, Germany, and it's by far the biggest model railroad in the world. These pictures you see are all from it, including the Millennium Falcon. It has, I don't even know how to describe this, but and I'm going to show you a video in a second, but it's got a working airport where planes take off and land. It's got a working seaport where ships move and dock and do things. The police cars chase down speeders. The fire engines solve fires. And it's like, you can see the numbers. I mean, 100,000 moving vehicles. It's just nuts. And the picture in the lower left is their control room to run all of this. So you can just, this is just something, these 2 brothers came up with this idea and have built this in Germany. And they've done a heck of a job. And I'm going to try, let's see if I can end this show real quick, because that's the last slide. And of course, it's going to think for a minute. Sorry. Anybody got any questions while I'm switching here? Okay, let's see.
Have you ever been there?
No, I want to go though. Wouldn't it be cool? My goodness. Hold on, guys. I'm trying to get this other thing up, and my computer's giving me a moment. Hold on, folks. I'm having some sharing issues here. It'll just be a minute. My mother would be very upset at me. There we go. Sorry about that, just took a minute. Let's see if we can get this up. Oh, okay. So this is the this is literally the harbor. So that's one of those container ships we were talking about earlier. And this is all 187 scale modeling, by the way. So that's pretty cool.
Do the little containers come off and it goes to like trains?
Yeah.
And then it rides around on the trains?
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, and then let's see if I can get this up. Oh, no, the sound. There's the airport. And some of the town. Yeah. I don't care about your advertisement. Turn it off. Oops. But yeah, you can see them actually moving and the cars in the background. I mean, literally everything works. And I don't remember if this is where the guy takes off or not. And that's just craziness. So there's that. Oh, okay. So one last thing. Let's see if I can get this thing up. And there's the police chasing down someone. And the crazy thing about this is that the cars just don't move, but they're all battery powered basically. And if they run out of batteries or start to get low, they drive themselves to a gas station on the layout that is actually a recharging point. So, I mean, these guys have just gone nuts and are just so over the top. You can see some of the trains. This is in Germany, obviously. But yeah, just insane craziness. All right. So I'm going to try to show something on my other screen real quick. And I don't know if this is going to work, but if it doesn't, I'm just going to turn this around. But just to kind of show you what you can do, I built, let's see, where's my screen? There it is. You'll probably see me in a second pop up over here. Okay, there I am. All right, let's see. So I built a little railroad, and I can't get my finger out of the way. Hold on. Let's see if I can get this a little better. Hold on, folks. There we go. Everybody see that? So you got a little model railroad that I built here. You can see some cars and stuff. I'm going to walk around to the other side while we do this. Pin this. Gas station. And let's see. Almost all over here, guys. So it's just, this is what a model railroad looks like. So this is just something I put together. It's basically on a shelf, and I just kind of built stuff out. You see little people and stuff. And you asked about how much detail you can put in. So we've got a little place of guys unloading a train. And of course, we've got trucks. We've got that. We've got some silos. And then I'm going to use the 050 switcher. And there are the people waiting for the train to come. And a little town. And there's the train station. And then you've got a crossing here. And I knocked over the sign, but there's a little gas station. So, and some of the parents may recognize the VW. You got Herbie the Love Bug there on the layout. But that's basically it. That's what a model railroad looks like, folks. Up close and personal. Let me get back over here. Stop video, stop video, stop video. All right. If I can get this to work, it would be better. There we go. All right, so does anybody have any questions? Don't everybody speak at once. No questions? All right. Well, that's all I have, folks. And I actually came in a little under the time this time.
Okay, do you know how to transfer the host back to me?
I can figure it out. 1 second.
I think it's under participants.
Yep.
Miss Elaine wants control back.
And she
I'm
has
control free. No, the problem is that if he's the host and he logs out, then it logs all of us out.
Yeah, I don't want to do
There
that.
we go. Thank you.
I've got this PowerPoint again. I will send it to you, Ms. Lane, so you have that. You can send it out to everybody.
Okay, so let's all give Mr. Justice a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you for being our merit badge presenter for the past 2 weeks. What I'm going to do next week is quiz you because the merit badge book doesn't just say listen to a presentation. It actually asks you to identify signal crossings and types of trains and things like that. So I will send an email, not a text, but I will send an email and it will show you which requirements were in the first week's video and which requirements were in the second week's video. It will have links to the video, and then there's a couple requirements that are in the book. So if you read the book, you'll get a couple requirements out of that as well. So next week we'll have a quiz, and it'll be required to get the merit badge. And then there'll be things that we'll have to do in the future, like take a ride on a historic railroad or something like that we'll try to plan.
The ones in Chattanooga and Nashville are really good for that, Elaine, just so you know. They're really good, well run. So.
In Chattanooga and Nashville?
Yeah, both that Tennessee Valley and the Tennessee Central, terrific historical railroads to run on. I mean, if you want a longer trip, there's one in Bryson City that's very pretty in the mountains. But
okay, so that'll be fun. So we'll do something like that. But next week will be the quiz, and I will send you the PowerPoint slides, the links to the video, and the list of requirements that we covered so that you can be prepared for the quiz. And then I think next week we should also give our speeches for our troop elections. And I will send out a text about that so everybody knows about it so they show up. And you need to switch positions. So if Molly was the scribe this past time, she can't be the scribe anymore. She needs to switch positions of responsibility. So she'll need to pick something else. And everyone should certainly consider having a position of responsibility. So are there any lingering questions for me or Mr. Justice?
Miss Elaine, which email are you using of mine?
I'm using your father's.
Okay, that should be good. The Thomasons or the JRT one?
The JRT one.
Okay, he checks that one.
Okay. He responds to that one, so I assume he checks that one.
if anybody does have any questions in the intervening weeks or wants to make a model railroad, needs help or whatever, just let Miss Elaine know or Miss Rachel know, and they can get in touch with me certainly. And I'll be glad to help anybody who needs it. So
great. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you guys. Have a good day. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.
I'm going to show those
Bye.
who's sticking around my dog because you wanted to see my dog.
Dog.
And I decided that I can't pick her up because she's like a 70-pound basset hound, but I can.
I don't know if you know this, but you were like one time came for like some band thing. You brought your dogs. My friend is like really terrified of dogs, and like she was like, "There are dogs out there," and I'm like, "Those dogs are not gonna hurt you." She's like, "There are dogs." Oh.
Yay!
Elaine, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elaine.
Okay, I'll see you all next week.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Have a
Thank
great week,
you.
everybody.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
You
Take
too,
care.
Caitlin.
Bye.
Bye,
Thanks
Miss
for
Lynn.
logging
Bye,
in,
Miss
Rachel.
Brown.
Oh, you're very welcome. Anytime. We'll talk next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.
How do I get out? Yes. Leave meeting.